You are now listening to the Be Your Own #LoveGoals podcast with Moe Ari
and Tiffany.
We just want you to remember that every person, regardless of identity, wants these three things: belonging, authenticity, and love.
And after a decade of partnership, we've learned to co-create these things and so much more.
So from wherever you're listening, we're going to go on a journey of becoming our own #LoveGoals. Now let's get into this episode. You are now listening to the Be Your Own #LoveGoals podcast with Moe Ari
and Tiffany.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Today, I've been thinking so much about how I've grown as a person and how I've expanded beyond the traumas and the triggers that I've experienced. So for a lot of people that don't know, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And the big reason why I became a therapist is because I went to therapy for the first time when I was in college at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. I went to the Women's Center on campus, and they provide care and love to everybody, but it was like free therapy. And I was like, I'm going to go because I was having what I experienced as like panic attacks or like just some type of traumatic overwhelm. I couldn't really name what it was at the time, but I knew, and with the support of some friends, they were like, I think this is what you're experiencing and you definitely should go. And that changed my life. Like working with that therapist was like, why are more people not talking about therapy? And how can I support? How can I become a therapist to help more people? And the rest is kind of history. That's why I wanted to become a therapist. That's why I became a therapist. But the rest wasn't history on the work that I had to do. And so even though I've worked with couples and individuals for the past decade doing trauma therapy in school, in high schools on the south side of Chicago, and doing trauma therapy in my own private practice and everything, and doing the trainings and everything, my personal work around trauma continues. And I think that that's a testament to the fact that for anybody who has experienced trauma to varying degrees, the work can be continuous and kind of lifelong, because so many different experiences can activate what I now understand are triggers. So many different experiences in your life or developmental stages can enact those specific triggers in different ways. And so the work then becomes on an individual level to be aware of it, so that you can do the couples work of talking about how we navigate this in our relationship as we are a person that's healing. So the experience that comes to mind very vividly is when we were in our first townhome at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, before our daughter was born. We were kind of nesting. We were trying to get things ready. We were putting up paintings on the wall and just trying to get our house together. And I remember being excited to do all of these physical tasks because you couldn't do a lot.
I was about to say, by we, you mean you, because I wasn't doing any of that.
Just watching me do things.
Just watching and directing.
But at one specific point, I remember putting up a painting on the wall, and I had my arms in the air and I was holding the painting steady and I couldn't quite get it on. It was taking a long time and my arms were like this for forever and I just couldn't take it anymore. And I remember being very upset, like viscerally upset, agitated. And in the moment, Tiffany, who's pregnant, was, sourcing a lot of empathy for me at this time. So I was not getting upset with Tiffany. But because of that dynamic of her being pregnant, I think that's what allowed me to stop and be aware. Because I knew that I was only trying, like in that moment and the time that you were pregnant, I was only trying to show Tiffany like the utmost like love and care and tenderness. I was like obsessed with her when she's pregnant. I don't think we have other episodes about how I don't know if she knew that, but obsessed with her. And so, so I was obsessed with her at the time. So that's why I was able to stop and say, you're agitated and you are not going to express this to Tiffany.
Yeah.
So what I ended up saying was, that there's something about standing here in this position and feeling stressed physically, and or in pain physically because I'm holding this position for too long, that is activating this very traumatic memory that I have around some physical pain. And I just really do not, I can't right now. I was able to get that out. And then we were able to spend more time talking about what the experience was that was being activated. And then we were able to work through what we should do in the follow-up, like if this happens again. Now, I'm here to tell you, here, my testimony.
Come on.
That didn't happen again because there was something about becoming aware of it and starting to name that experience and becoming extremely aware of how I internally respond that prevents it from showing up like that anymore. But I had to get really honest about what the trauma was and talk about it. Honor it, name it, heal it, allow it to go. But that was the first time in our relationship, and I think we had been together at least 7 years at that point, that I could even name that this experience had happened or that these experiences had happened. And we hadn't talked about any childhood trauma besides like sexual abuse in childhood. And so she was unaware of these other experiences that were leaving me feeling like, whoo, what do I do? So for anybody listening, that's a little bit of the backstory why I became a therapist, because I really wanted to help people beyond these kinds of experiences so that they could live lives that are not interrupted all of the time by these traumas. And yet I'm finding myself as an individual being impacted. So I was like, well, we got to get this together. So this brings me to the idea of talking about triggers, how we manage them in relationship, in romantic partnerships and friendships when they come up. How can we be accountable? Because notice in that story, I didn't say I went off on Tiffany and then said, this is why I did that because I was triggered. I didn't do that. I said, you know what? I am not going to respond like that. I was in command in that moment. I'm not saying I've always had it together, but in this moment of awareness, I was like, I am going to be loving to my pregnant wife as she waddles around here. And I'm going to express to her that there is something coming up that I have yet to be able to name. And even if that's all that I could do. Now, we've been talking a lot about vulnerability. And I think that this gets to the heart of it because I could have been worried around shame or how she might judge me, how she could or could not believe me because I have particular traumas around that, being believed or not. But I let that go because I really wanted her to know that any upset or anything she could feel in the room wasn't about her. It was this stuff that was coming up that I had to get to name. And your receptivity to that was beautiful. And I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the receptivity is also a part of the vulnerability. So if you experience your partner as being triggered or having a particular experience that they can't really name, you being willing to take a pause and have a different narrative or be just utterly curious without any sort of preconceived notions or assumptions, I think is a responsibility to hold space for a person that's experiencing that. And I think that it can be very helpful and beneficial in a relationship to really receive and understand this history and this potential trauma that may have happened in your partner's life prior to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
This is really important as we talk about triggers. This idea that a trigger is in response to a trauma that happened prior to you. So a lot of times when we're talking about triggers in society, people will say this person triggered me. The person, the event, the space that's happening in the present moment did not trigger you. Maybe there is something that's being activated that was already existed in your psyche. A flip turn, like it's almost like a switch flips or a switch turns on, and now this trauma is activated and it feels alive and present, but the person didn't do that. And so it's important that we clear up our definitions around triggers before we even move further in the episode. So I love that you said that. The trigger is in response to a traumatic experience that has already happened. And how often are we in relationship with our partner responding to something that is really about our childhood many of us may not be aware yet, but the hope is that once we have this episode, you'll walk away from this episode becoming curious, at least, about, ooh, how have I done this?
Right.
And we're not in judgment. Again, I started with a story about me because I want you to know, as a therapist, I have even done this, struggled with this, because trauma, it is so upsetting and destabilizing and difficult to deal with, or to cut off every head of the snake as it pops up, right? And yet we keep persevering and we keep doing this work because we love our partners, we love ourselves, and we want to live healthy, happy lives. So we often talk about triggers in the context of this society in a really not supportive way. We hear people saying they were triggered as a defense or justification for the behavior that was harmful. So we often will hear, I was triggered, so I did X. But very often, the trigger is in response to a trauma that was previously experienced. So we kind of covered that. But I want to give you a mental health definition here so that we have this working definition before we move on. When a person is triggered, they're being provoked, or I like to say activated, by a stimulus that awakens or worsens the symptoms of a traumatic event or mental health condition. A person's strong reaction to being triggered may come as a surprise to other people because the response may seem out of proportion with the stimulus. But often we're not aware of what the stimulus is. We're thinking it's us in this conversation, and it's probably a trauma or something else that we've experienced. So it might seem like, oh, they're reacting so big and I don't understand. That's your cue that there's probably something else they're responding to. If ever you're feeling this doesn't even make sense for them to act like this over this, that's your cue that's your cue to really get down into your heart, pull out some compassion, and go, what else could be going on here? If you're experiencing someone that is responding in a way that's much bigger than what the stimulus was. So let's define trauma. Trauma is this lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event that may have been emotionally or physically harmful. So the trauma could be the event, but we'll call that the traumatic event or the traumatic incident. The trauma is this experience of living beyond that. So how might it look when someone is triggered, to as a person that's kind of been with me, seen me as I've been, kind of triggered or in the response to trauma, and you've also had your own experiences. How does that look?
So triggers, are as most things with people are pretty individualized based on the person and can vary widely from person to person. But there's a couple of kind of big buckets that we can place them in, and one being intrusive memories.
Okay.
So you might experience yourself or another person as having flashbacks. Where they might be reliving a moment as if it's happening in the present, or it could look something like an upsetting dream or nightmare. Right? Like so that someone recounts to you, or that you actually have, whether it's continuous, whether it happens at particular times.
And if that nightmare happens, or if you're a person that has those kinds of vivid dreams or nightmares, don't underestimate how they might be lingering with you in your waking life. Because I'm a person that has those dreams, and I don't always think about, well, how did that put you on edge when you started your day?
Exactly. That's helpful. And then the second bucket of this could be avoidance. And so that may look like avoiding actually talking about that traumatic event. And additionally, avoiding places or people or things that might remind you of that event.
So if there's a subject that your partner just will not go near, there's likely some other trauma under there. And so that's a point where you might want to offer compassion or empathy to try to get them to really open up about what's going on there.
And a third category of this might be negative changes in thinking and mood. And some examples of that might be difficulty maintaining close relationships, or negative thoughts about yourself, or feeling detached from family or friends.
Yeah.
So feeling like just relationship building, whether it's with, people from your past or people in the present, just feels like a real struggle, whether you have the desires to or not. It just feels like a challenge.
Yeah. I like to think of this one in the context of grief. So a lot of times people will feel kind of severed once they've gone through a loss. So it takes a while to assume some type of normalcy or to feel attached to other people again, because grief has this way of really bringing out this like severing experience. Something that's so out of the ordinary happens and it shifts our world. So we don't know what normal is. And so often people experience loss as a trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so it can bring about this negative change in thinking and mood. Sometimes people categorize this as depression. Grief gets tricky when we talk about depression because it has more to do with how long it happens, and grief really grief comes about from something often that we can name. And so it's not just general experiences of sadness. There's a loss that occurred.
Right. And then lastly, for the last big category, because as I mentioned, there's so many different ways, it's changes in physical and emotional reactions. So this could look like trouble sleeping, or always being on guard for some sort of danger, even if it's not immediately present, but feeling like a level of defense, or on guard.
I've had the honor of being around people who have either served in the military or worked in emergency response or did some other kind of profession where they had to be like on in like this very combat sort of way. And so the reaction when, let's say, an alarm goes off or something falls and it's loud and they're like about to hit the door, they out their seat like, and if I take off, y'all need to come, like they're serious, right? And I'm like, I'm not following you. I am not your wife. But they're like, nah, you need to, they get big upset, like you're not following them. But and we had to talk about this in these contexts, and what I realized is that they could be, now they're conditioned to respond in this way. Or I think about my dad, my whole life, whenever we wake him up from a nap, he jumps out of bed like, what's going on? And I'm like, you clearly, and I remember as a kid being like, what happened? I think he experienced a fire or something.
That would make sense.
It would make a lot of sense. You like literally when he gets up, he's like, what happened? If you wake him up, I'm like, I'll leave you alone because there's no way to wake up out your bed, So I'm thinking of a number of different experiences, but this is a really good, that change in physical and emotional reaction is a really good one because it can happen over time. It can happen before you're even aware that there's this change. So imagine if you experience something in childhood that now has you on guard with people. You have to go very far back to a time where you didn't act like that to be able to understand that there was a change.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like these things are very like, there's a level of self-awareness and intuitiveness that or ability to tap into your intuition that is needed to really be able to sit with and understand your own triggers and then other people's triggers as well. But also approaching this with a lot of compassion and sensitivity at the same time, and having grace for yourself and other people.
Right. So questions that need answers to.
Okay. So here's the question. I had an argument with my partner, and once we were able to talk about what was happening, I realized that my triggers are triggering my partner. What do we do?
I mean, that's an interesting question. This makes me think a lot about like our response to triggers. Because it's not that your trigger triggered them. That would be like saying my traumatic event triggered your traumatic event. So unless your traumatic event somehow made their thing happen, your triggers didn't trigger each other. It's that your response to the trigger, meaning you yell, incites whatever their response to the trigger is. Whenever they feel like they're being yelled at, they run. So it's really about our responses to the trigger. So I want to tease that out a little bit, because what I was hearing was that however our defenses are being activated, they are at odds. That's what I really hear. So if I'm able to just kind of share that language, that we're not necessarily talking about our triggers. You all each have separate traumas. So separating the traumas and the triggers, what you all have learned to do as a coping strategy or a defense mechanism is to respond in a way that is currently at odds with one another. So we have to clean that up. We have to figure out how we're going to respond in a way that really serves the relationship and what we want to see happen between the two of us. Now, I know I said 2 words: coping strategy, defense mechanism. So I'll define those things, and I'm going to let Tiffany, to talk here. But I define a defense strategy as a technique or strategy that we learned in order to defend or protect ourselves. You think defend or defense, think protect. We did that to guard ourselves from threat. Now, a coping strategy is something that helps us to make better of a difficult situation. So I like to think that defense strategies we learn very young. They help us to survive unsurvivable situations. And we don't need them anymore. We're not currently in a place in time where we need to be defending. I like to think of them as survival strategies. Our earliest behaviors as animals or humans or primates is to survive. And so defense mechanisms have to be activated or you get eaten in the wild. It's eat or be eaten. So a coping strategy, though, is something that allows you to evolve. Evolution has made it such that we now have thinking capability and talking capability. So we get to create all kinds of inventions that keep us at the top of the food chain when we otherwise would not be. That's a coping strategy. And so I ask couples to use coping strategies to help them to evolve how they communicate, especially when they're experiencing triggers. And I can give some examples in a little bit.
Yeah, I think is really helpful. And I think even your reframe about our response to being triggered more so than the trigger triggering the other thing. I mean, it's something I've said before. And so I think it's really important when you experience what might feel like that. And that being triggered by another person's trigger is, I invite you, as I am on a journey of doing, to take a pause and really see what mirror might be happening there. And when I say mirror, I mean bringing light to something that might be happening for you. Bringing light to how you respond to a particular behavior, how you respond to a particular person or a particular time of year, like whatever the situation is, to just use that as information of like, okay, let me take a step back, because something else is happening here for me. And it's probably something else happening for you, but I want to take the accountability for myself.
I think that that's a good segue into hashtag LoveResources, because what you're offering up is that we have to first start to become aware of how we're even responding to our partner, to people, places, things that are activating. Is that the gist of what you were saying?
Absolutely.
And so I think that that's the first helpful piece of advice, is to become aware. If you can be like me in that moment, I don't want to respond this way, but I'm feeling this visceral thing happening inside of me. How can I become aware? You can start to become aware through what we'll just call a self-awareness exercise. So if you can do these things, I think you can begin to really become aware of yourself in relationship and yourself when you're triggered. So this exercise is going to involve writing down different components of your last argument or the last time you felt triggered. And you can use the following questions to help you identify what is going on. So after the exercise is over, I want you to notice if there are any patterns that emerge around your triggers. Are there things that you notice a lot? things that you're like, well, this happened a lot before. If so, I want you to begin to notice those kinds of things. And because as they come up, they're probably pointing to the fact that you're triggered. You can become aware, like Tiffany is saying. So do you remember how you were breathing? For me, my breathing, I hold my breath when I'm upset or when I'm triggered or activated. Do you remember any sensations in your body? If so, what parts of your body felt the sensation? I feel tightness in my chest. It's almost like, it's not like a tightness. It's almost like I feel like my adrenaline is rushing and I'm preparing to run a marathon. If you've ever had to walk out on a stage or do something that you were afraid to do, that kind of adrenaline rush, that's what I feel when I'm feeling activated. Do you remember what you were thinking? If so, what were the thoughts? Were you blaming somebody? Were you feeling like you were misunderstood? What were those thoughts? Do you remember what you were feeling? Name the feelings. So I want feelings words. I was feeling sad. I was feeling hopeless. I was feeling disappointed. I was feeling angry. Name the feelings. Do you remember what you said? This is important because if you can remember what you said, those words, even if they were nasty or not nice to your partner, those words can help you to understand a pattern around when you're triggered. Maybe you say things that are unkind, and that's your sign. Maybe you say, okay, and nothing else, and you shut down, and that's your sign. Maybe you say, I just need space, and that's your sign. What did you say? Do you remember what you heard? What you hear when you're upset is really important. Did you hear nothing? Sometimes people are like, I don't even know what they said. That's information. So what did you hear? And what did you need in those moments? I want you to round that out with trying to articulate now and write down now what you needed, because what you needed can be helpful information moving forward for how to support you when you're beginning to be activated so that it doesn't escalate and so that you can have a moment where you begin to access what's going on for you. I want you to, your rules for this exercise are to observe without judgment, regulate your breathing, have self-compassion, and after the exercise, honor yourself and the courage to be vulnerable just for completing this exercise. What skills will they walk away from this exercise with, Tiffany, and why do you feel like that's important?
Yeah, so given that this is a self-awareness exercise, definitely self-awareness, self-compassion. I think this is, a huge part of this work. And I mentioned like having the sensitivity and compassion to approach these things, whether that's with yourself or other people, is so important to be able to do this work in a way that is supportive to all involved. Also observation without judgment. So literally listening to yourself or other people and as a neutral observer. It's here, this is what it was, this is no judgment. And then self-assessment. So really taking the time to ask yourself the questions and connect with the feelings or the different experiences. And I think these skills are so helpful for so many reasons. And in the context of relationship, it is, our responsibility to own and take accountability and stand in the power that we have to be able to co-create the lives that we want with our partners. And a part of that is getting face to face with these traumas. And I know that it is not an easy walk in the park. It's not something that you would necessarily voluntarily sign up for, but it does really help us. As you mentioned in your first example, it really helps you to kind of end that cycle. When you become aware of what's happening and you know what's happening, it kind of subsides. And then you might encounter the next thing to work through. But that's one step closer to being able to really connect with your partner and really, as I said, like co-create what you want the relationship to look like, but not just look like, but feel like too.
Feel like. Beautiful. Thank you, Tiffany. I really appreciate that. I think that this exercise can be so helpful. And so I'm looking forward to you all practicing that and really taking that seriously. So This brings us to Truth or Truth.
Truth or Truth.
We created this segment of the episode because we really love to play games together and enjoy one another's company and time, especially after our daughter goes to bed. Yes. So we play a lot of games, and we started out playing Truth or Dare, but it will always end up with us just asking truth questions because we love.
I would probably ask outrageous dares, and it was like, no, you don't play fair, so let's just do Truth or Truth.
Basically, she's like, all right, strip for me right now. And I'm like, Tiffany.
Accurate.
And she's like, put on those Timberlands, get on that flannel shirt, and do your dance. And I'll be like, now I'm never doing dares with you.
God. Don't forget the lumberjack hat.
And what lumberjack hat?
Fantasy.
Oh my gosh. Now y'all know she gonna have me out in this little outfit, whatever this outfit is. I think it was like gray sweatpants, Timberlands, a flannel shirt.
And the lumberjack hat.
The little roll-up hat.
Yeah, with the little flaps on the side.
Oh no, I never had a hat like that.
You didn't? Oh, that's what I wanted.
Oh my gosh. Ratchet, okay? So that's why we play Truth or Truth, because there's no dares happening there. But it ends up being a mix of would you rather, never have I ever, truth or dare, and so on. Okay. So our question today is, would you rather be married without love or be a single parent?
Be married without love
or be a single parent.
I'm going to have to go with being a single parent. And I say that because love, again, is at the root of, or the foundation of how I desire to live my life.
Yeah.
And in the context of this question, it feels like, yes, I'd be a single parent, but I'd be a parent to a child or children that, they just radiate love.
Yeah.
They radiate this love and this joy and this innocence that is like otherworldly sometimes. And to give that up, to be married, honestly, it feels like being married for the sake of being married. If there's no love there, it's just a choice I'm not willing to make. So I'm gonna have to go with being a single parent.
Yeah, and relying on that community.
Yes, I'll take that.
See, now I don't really want to be a single parent.
I don't want it, but if I had to choose these two things,
yeah, I'm not gonna be married for the sake of being married with no kids. That's the reason why I'm married for the sake of being married. So I'm gonna have to go with single parent with kids. And soaking up all that love, but also, dating and, like none of the rules didn't say that we
create some love. You might get married as a result after.
Yeah. Okay. And also rely on our village and like really have great relationships with friends. So I'm gonna have to say single parent with the kids that we love and be happy with that, because I can't with the married for the sake of being married. Period. Okay, just to say you're married and show people that, but there's no love. Like, I don't want that. Yeah.
No interest.
None. We see each other.
We see each other. Okay. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for this episode on triggers. Thank you for sitting with what comes up for inside of each of you as we talk about trauma. Thank you for allowing me the space to share more about my journey, why I became a therapist, and also some of the experiences that have led me here today. Thank you all for tuning in each week. If you have questions that you want to submit to us for questions that need answers, feel free to do so on our website. You can DM us. Definitely just reach out with your questions, because we love to hear from you, and it helps us to know what it is that you want us to talk about in these episodes.
And I just want to add one thing in here before you end. And I know we're finishing up. I just want to say to anybody who feels like they might not have experienced trauma in a way that you've seen on TV or you've heard in mainstream media, if you haven't experienced sexual trauma or particular child abuse or any of the things that are like the most prevalent, to also recognize that there's so many different types of trauma and there's so many other ways that it may show up. So just be aware that it might not always look like what you see as the most prevalent type, but that it could still be there. So I just wanted to add that in there before you ended.
Yeah. So if you're experiencing any of those like signs that you're feeling triggered, it's important to go back and figure out what the traumatic event was. And it's okay that trauma doesn't look like other people's. It's still happening. And so to get the support that you need to show up the best for yourself and in your relationship, and to really live a life of happiness and being your own love goals is really important. Always. Okay. Have a great day. This has been Be Your Own Love Goals podcast with Moe Ari
and Tiffany.
Have a great day and be well.
If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Video episodes are on YouTube and Spotify.
If you want your question included in an upcoming episode, feel free to reach out to us on Instagram at Be Your Own Love Goals or check out our website at lovegoalspodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Bye.